Why do we as modern Christians elevate unfaithful role models? That's a question I want to answer today. Listen, I'm young enough to understand today's culture, but old enough to remember a day when men and women of godly, good character were elevated as role models. That's what we'll talk about today. Let's get started. Everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo here. Listen, truth comes first, and that's followed up by the reasons. After we give you the reasons, we go back to prove the truth. That's done in the process. We're always constantly learning, because when we stop learning, we stop teaching, or at least stop teaching well. We don't want to do that. Welcome to Reason for Truth. Listen, there was once a day when Mother Teresa, Billy Graham, Harriet Tubman, who escaped Christian slave, who became the conductor of the Underground Railroad, they were considered heroes. Susan B. Anthony, Dwight L. Moody, famous preacher who preached in the coal mines. And then there's men like Brother Andrew, right? Famous Bible smuggler, camped out in tents and drove an old Volkswagen Rabbit throughout Europe to spread Bibles. One thing that all these men and women share in common is that none of them really sought to be famous. None of them had any major moral failings. They were consistently right. They were consistently good. And they gave all glory and attention to God. As a matter of fact, I think they were probably very fearful not to take any attention away from God and place it on themselves. Personally, I admire accomplished men and women for what they've done. I don't admire any man or woman who sacrificed their marriage, their children, their family for worldly or even ministerial success, albeit business. Certainly not ministry, which I think is worse. I've made my own mistakes, trust me. And have experienced and evaluated my own failures over the years, but I have not and will not build a platform based on those mistakes. To do so, I think would be very immoral and very hurtful to those perhaps that were on the end of taking from those gains. Even worse, that would equate to a lack of dependence, I think, on God based on our own mortal failures in their present gain. So we like to say that it's for the glory of God. I want to challenge that narrative. Oh, I serve God. I'm never home to see my kids grow up. Never here to spend much time with my wife. The name of God. Apostle Paul did it. Well, listen, at the end of the day, Apostle Paul wasn't perfect, and the mission can get done. And those were the apostles, by the way. We're not apostles. Just saying, don't put ourselves in that position. And we are called to serve God, but we're also, if you're going to have children, you get married, you need to be faithful to that. So we like to say that, again, that it's for the glory of God, but I want to challenge that narrative in most cases, and certainly for business people. Well, that's where the job took us. Got to go where the money's at. Really? Okay, to where you don't see your children grow up or don't participate in their sports. Sadly, this has become the norm. We no longer have a strong bench of biblically literate Christians and role models that we once did in this country. And what does that say for you and I? What does that say for the youth? That's a scary part, because they're tomorrow's leaders. The point I want to make is simple, in that so many, if not most Americans, Christian big-name rock star speakers, they often speak of failed marriages, illegitimate business ventures, not all, but many, failed parenting or business ventures, and unethical underpinnings. Now, that being said, I'm not saying they should, listen, they can't repent and then do great things. I'm just saying, where are all the people that were consistently, quietly doing the job well when they return? Now, we always like to look at the prodigal son. And everyone, look at this guy who was eating with the pigs and he returned. But, and his brother wasn't necessarily the biblical, light that we all want to follow. But there are many, as I listed, the Mother Teresas, the Billy Grahams, Harriet Tubman, and shouldn't be the other way around. Shouldn't we be looking to people like that as role models? When I was growing up, honestly, that's who, those were the real role models. Shouldn't we as Christians promote faithful men and women who get married, stayed married, and were faithful? Shouldn't we promote moms and dads who truly sacrifice themselves, and business people instead of sacrificing their marriages or their children? Come on. Better yet, shouldn't we, as Christians, elevate those who abandon their husband and wife and children to pursue worldly success or ministerial success? I'd submit that America's falling apart in great part due to the simple fact that we just simply lack great, consistent biblical role models for our youth. And I think that, when we look at what are we communicating to our youth, we're saying that, hey, listen, these great, they make for great books and movies. They really do. To say that, hey, listen, look at this guy. He did this. He was, he's a drug dealer, and then he came back to Jesus. I like reading those books, by the way. But we need the consistent people. We have to see that there actually are people that don't really get that much far off track. And because the question comes down to, again, what's that message we're sending to our young people? But let me ask you this one question, which is easier, right? To stay faithful to your husband and wife, to your job, to your country, to your children, or to compromise, go off, do what you want to do, build your ministry, build your business, or act sexually promiscuous, then come back and they become a Christian and build a platform based on that past. I would say it's a lot harder to stay consistent and to do the right thing all along. And I'm not saying we don't even highlight some of the people who have come back to Christ after getting off track, but we ought to limit that. We ought to be highlighting more of the people that actually, got on track, stayed consistently on track, because that shows young people what? This is the way it's supposed to be. We don't do that. How many stories of people like Harriet Tubman or Billy Graham? How many do you hear? People like, well, they don't exist. I think they're out there. They're just not as exciting, and they just didn't get the fanfare. They just didn't have the camera and the attention. Sadly, we no longer value and promote men and women of consistent virtue. In today's culture, that's too boring. It doesn't sell books, doesn't build platforms. The solution is to get back to biblically based role models. We need to do that. Those serving in the mission field, they're real exciting. A lot of times their work's pretty boring. I know missionaries. It's just the day in and day out of being consistent, faithful servants. Those who serve faithfully according to God's word as pastors of the church. A lot of good pastors out there, folks. They don't live these exciting lives. They live as servants to others. We don't highlight them. Why? Well, because that's just kind of private thing, and that's just not something that we look to as sexy, and hey, it's not seeing something that's exciting. What's exciting is drugs, exploding things, things that are entertaining. How about that? Better word for it. So, a glimpse into the future. What does the future look like, you might ask? Well, I'm confident that we, the church, will once again, I think, get back to raising up for faithful servants and role models. And as the Christian faith comes under greater persecution, we're going to get back to that. We're going to look at these big ministry platforms and even many of these supercharged large churches. I go to one, it's a great, very biblical church. But I think the game of church for many churches across the country is going to dwindle out with persecution. When Christianity gets real, the game, the church, and the networking business world that churches become will begin to fade. But in the end, listen, as I reflect back on my life of having been born in the United States a long time ago, I remember a day when true biblical role models did exist. I remember a day when Christians who fell into sin was restored and elevated back to the role and influenced to, put up to a big platform. But that's good, but not as the norm. So why were such failings not rewarded when I was younger? Because they weren't. Well, the answer's simple. Moral failure was not rewarded back when I was younger. If you fell off the wagon and you act poorly, you would be restored, but you're never put back into a place of leadership. Today, we just shove them to the front of the line. We bypass the faithful servants, the ministers, the pastors, the missionaries. Why? Well, because, listen, this guy was a drug dealer. This guy was a sex addict, whatever it was. And then he repented. And that's exciting. It's just new. It's human nature. It's exciting for me to read those stories. But it makes for poor role models if that becomes the norm. So grace and restoration is good, but elevating one based on their past failures can be really bad for the next generation. So I guarantee you, this message is going to rub some the wrong way. Got a lot of conferences out there where you got a bunch of Christians up there, and I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. I'm not a big fan of big, super big conferences. You know what I'm a fan of? Getting into the trenches, doing the work one-on-one. That's where lives are changed. He'll make the platform what he wants it to be. We just had an episode that went to 15,000 downloads. Glory be to God. I didn't set out to do anything. I aired that a year ago, and it just went viral. So may God be given the glory. And, if you want to think that that's something that's I benefit somehow, how do I benefit? Well, that's the point. We can do great things. Let's just make sure we point back to God and not ourselves. So in closing, until the Christian body stops rewarding famous Christian speakers and authors based on how much money they spend or how articulate they are with being able to manipulate the algorithms in the internet, or certainly by their past sinful life as a platform. Listen, we all make mistakes. We ought not build on the future platform based on those mistakes. Not all, and if we do, we have to make sure as organizations and as media outlets that we make sure that we are elevating the people who were consistently, they were people who of virtue who stood the test of time and did the right thing all along. And I'm not saying don't build a platform on there. I'm saying as a culture, that shouldn't be the norm. The norm should be showing that there's a lot of consistent, people who were faithful. That should be what we put as an example for the next generation. And until we do that, and perhaps because we're, maybe that's a reflection of our culture, but even if it is, we have to make the effort to start producing biblically virtuous role models. And I'm going to stick with that as a truth. Put your comment below. If you like it, don't like it, put it there. I'll respond to it. Thank you for tuning in. So before you go, I want to recommend a couple things, man. Let's get equipped. EquippedAcademy.com or OnlineChristianTraining.com. Want to check those out. Make sure you do one other thing. You can always join my community, by the way, StephenGarrettFollow.com. Make sure that you like this. Share it with others. Like it. Make sure you subscribe. That's going to help us get these algorithms up, and you don't want to miss any more of these. We'll see you at the next video. I'm your host, Stephen Garrettfollow, and this is your Reason for Truth for today.